Mike from Gear Diary, here to look at SampleTank for the iPad from MultiMedia. Now what SampleTank is kind of what it sounds like. Samples are one of the fundamental ways of making sound out of a synthesizer system. You may have a system, older systems with analog synthesizers have their own specific oscillators in there which then have modulation systems. And as you got into later systems, this is about 20 years old underneath it, Roland system, it would have samples of synthetic sounds made with oscillators, which would then be put through a digital sound train in order to produce analog-like timbres. But further upon that, you would then have a straight sample system, such as a Kurzweil, or really the Kurzweil is my favorite one in that group, where you're fundamentally playing samples at a very high resolution, really excellent reproduction of those original sounds. So what the SampleTank looks to do in a very inexpensive iPad app is reproduce the sounds of a system that may have cost $1,000, $2,000 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, and would still cost a lot more on a hardware synthesizer to produce. For instance, if we start here with a rock piano, is what it's called. You've got a nice warm sound, plenty of, get the nice striking sound, hammer effect. And you've got sustain, you've got overtones, a really faithful reproduction. And I'm just playing this really through a Korg Nano key, in through the iPad, out through a small practice guitar amp. So it's not like I'm taking this and really running it through a high-end studio sound. This is just a pretty basic thing that you could get. You could have it out through, in fact I did have it out just through the iPad speaker, but it wasn't really loud enough for this. Now, first, there's a lot more you can do, and you can't really see it here, but there is a whole strip of adjustment knobs that you can work with. But let's move on to a couple different things. So, I mean, you can do drums. And so, I mean, it's really all in what you want to do. So we have an 800 series kit, which is like the classic Roland. So that's a real classic, what would be dance music, house, techno from the early 80s. And you know, that's really, there's just a lot of different, and you may not be able to hear it, but I can still hear the bell sound from that last cymbal just kind of fading off into the, you know, into silence. And what that shows me and shows to my ear is that there was a lot of detail and a lot of memory put into a faithful reproduction of that sound and capturing it from the strike all the way to the end of the tone. So, you know, that there's a lot you can do. We can move to basses. You know, if we move to a one thing to notice there is that SampleTank not only supports all of these sounds, supports a keyboard that I have plugged in through the camera connection kit. It also supports function pads that are on there. So you may have things like, I can adjust the octave, I can use pitch bend, I can use modulation wheel. All of those functions will work perfectly well through here. The other thing that is important, right now I don't have my MIDI keyboard up here with this setup. It would just take up too much space. But for something like, in this case, I've got the Griffin MIDI Connect, but in the other room I actually have the iRig MIDI system from MultiMedia. Either one of them would allow me to play through SampleTank using a full dynamic keyboard, because as nice as this Nano key is, it's really not something that I would use as a full piano. So if I now move along to say a synthesizer, system. And let's just start with something simple, such as an 8 sawtooth fat is what it's called. So now if you notice, this is what you call monophonic sound. It only plays one note at a time, and that's characteristic of older analog keyboards. So actually I'm going to switch over to it. This is a square wave based one, and what I'm hoping to show is that if I change the resonance, it doesn't show up as well on that. So let me go back to the original one. So this is a 2-pole. And that has a really nice filter set up on it just as a lead. But now if I take that resonance and I amp it. So not only does it have digitally produced filters in there, but they're dynamic. So that's a resonant filter. Sorry, I'm not going to provide the double E lesson on the resonance and multi-pole filtering, but suffice to say that this is a digital version of an analog filtration system for sound. And it really... And then you can go just to a straight sound all the way up through. Really, full resonance. Bring that back down. You notice that the attack is a little bit slow, that it starts. Now if I want it to be even slower, it comes up very slowly. Or if I want it to be really sharp, similarly, if I wanted to have it sustain for a while after. Likewise, if I wanted to turn the release way off. And these filters work in real time as well. If you've noticed as I've been touching this, I don't really know how well you can see it, but this panel slides, so there's even more. So you've got your what would be your filtration system, as well as your amplification system, and as well you've got reverb. So I can turn. It has again very nice digitally produced effect. And without going into too much about it, I would just some of these things like that. That's an omni effect. So once I've placed it for whatever sound channel I'm in, and right now, again, hard to see, but there are 4 parts that I can have. So right now I'm just in channel A, because you can then go into just playing the keyboard. You have pads for recording. And you can actually go ahead and record songs, and then you can play them back. Not only that, with the newest version, you could then use the MIDI input in order to record the sounds, play them back out through MIDI. You can use controllers, like right here I'm using fairly generic things that are part of the MIDI keyboard in terms of octave transposition, modulation, pitch, wheel effects, sustain, pedals. Those are all things that are inherent and kind of what I would call nominal controllers. Other things that you could use, and you could always attach effects through something like an iRig stomp box, through a separate MIDI controller. One of my MIDI keyboards has a whole bank of kind of panel-based controllers, and I could use all of those controllers as well in this. It has a more extensive set of controls. So, but really when it comes down to it, the greatest thing about SampleTank, and why I call this, if you want to get real, get SampleTank, is that the sounds are just gorgeous. So this is SampleTank for the iPad. One thing I will show a little bit is that if you go to there's a shopping cart up here. You've got any number of purchases that are in here, and IK Multimedia does do deals occasionally. But you can add effects packs, percussion, synth pads, electronics, chromatics. You can add everything. Every single thing that's on there is $40. So I mean, that seems like a fair amount. But again, like I say, you've got vibes. All of a sudden you've gone from metal to a clearly wooden sound on the marimba. So, into kalimba. So again, it has just such a wonderful tonal characteristic to it that again is definitely. It's a question of whether or not, what that's worth to you. But as you go through each one, so here's what you can see is right below my finger, things turn to gray. So there's a number of things you would have to pay for, as well as a number of things that come either, and it actually specifies. So it says the full version, iRig. So I got some things by having other iRig products, things that are part of the free, things that are part of just registering. So if you've made sure to register it, again, you get really, it does change what you get. So you've got, several drum sets, basses. You've got about 20 of every single type of instrument in there. So, there's certainly a lot of value. So, SampleTank for the iPad, available. There'll be a link in the review through the iTunes App Store. Mike from Gear Diary, and thanks for listening.